Well, good evening. We want to welcome everyone again to part three of Prepared Country Living. Before we begin again, I'm just going to ask if we can have a word of prayer, and we will continue on. Father in heaven, we thank you again for this opportunity that we're able to have to be able to come together, to be able to learn what we need to do in these last days to prepare for the final crisis, that we can spiritually be connected with you, allowing you to perfect our character, that we can mentally be prepared because of the things and the persecution, the ridicule, and everything that God's people will have to endure. And Father, also physically, the things that we will be dealing with as well. That if we are faithful to you, you've promised us that the disease will not come upon us. So guide and direct in our presentation this evening, that you would lead and guide and bless. And those that are watching, streaming right now, live, those that will be watching, that it can be a blessing and a benefit to them. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, what we're going to look at now is what we need to do as far as, it's very important, as far as food storage. And one of the things that is very interesting here is the fact that something that can take time. If you have the equipment, that's great. If not, you can get somebody or hire somebody with a backhoe to build, to actually dig out in the ground basically a little cavern that can be self-sustained for gardening. And this will allow you to have a little greenhouse, very inexpensive, something that's very simple to be able to do. Doesn't take much material, it just takes some time. And then once you have it in place, the plastic, all either the 2x4s, or if you cut wood from your own land, then you can set up a nice earthy greenhouse that you can pretty much have it a year round. Now you may have to basically run some water lines, hoses to be able to keep it watered during the season. Build an entrance door as well. But it's something that won't take too much effort, too much expense, basically, to build. You just need to have the roofing on your the greenhouse here. This will will help keep the greenhouse at a steady about 90 degrees or so, where plants in most cases can actually can grow. The next thing is, once you start growing the gardens and stuff, the other thing is learning how to do canning for long-term sustainability. And again, what I talk about is about a year's supply of food. You want to look at the Ball Blue Book. You can get from most hardware stores like Walmart. You can get it on the internet. You can get it from Ball Corporation as well, on how to what they suggest as far as canning, and then there's some modification and adjustments from there. Also, friends, the reasons are many and wonderful and powerful as to what you can do for canning. The time has come to seriously learn and implement these agriculture ideas and training as quickly, and try to do it as thoroughly as possible. I appreciate the simple but profound truth expressed in Proverbs. It says, "He that gathereth in the summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in the harvest is a son that causes shame." This is Proverbs 10:5. And then in 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worth an infidel." So a person needs to be providing. Men and husbands, you need to provide for your family. You're to protect them and keep them, sustain them, and all that. And wives, the same thing, is to support, encourage, and the husband, and to be the mother for the children as well. So these are powerful instructions. So where do we start? Well, there's a lot of valuable information that is available. And so what you will need here, transitioning from a grocery store to a home store, is glass jars. This is the time that I would encourage you to get out to Walmart's, to the Dollar General stores, the Family Dollars. Start buying these quart jars, pint jars, or whatever you can get. So jars. And then it's also going to be, as far as how many, I would look at start getting them, when you're able to get money, or when you get paid, or what have you. Start buying at least a dozen at a time, or 2 dozen as you can buy them. Normally, you're going to spend anywhere from $10 to $15 for brand new ones. You also will need lids and rings to be able to can and preserve the food in the jars. You'll need a jar funnel and jar lifter. You'll need kitchen tongs or magnetic lid lifter because when you're sterilizing the lids to put them on the jars after you put the food in, whether it's applesauce or corn or whatever, those lids are pretty hot, and you'll need some type of magnetic lid to be able to lift it and put it on the jars. A water bath canner and or pressure canner, there's good use for both of them either way. You want spoons, measuring cups, kitchen towels, hot pads, and when you look at trying to can, you're going to spend some time, make it a day or two to be able to can at least. Those are usually about the minimum, at least a day or two. The other thing is methods. There are different ones called boiling water bath for high acid foods, steam pressure canning for low acid foods, and then there's two ways to fill the jars, like with a hot pack, raw or cold pack. These are for like more delicate types of foods as well. Adjusting processing times in both water bath and pressure canning for high altitude. So the higher, if you're like in Denver and all that, then you'll have to adjust for the pressure canning and also the bath. There's a lot of demo on pressure canning and water bath canning that are out there. We're just going to discuss it. There's enough information out there for you to Google it or to go on YouTube to actually search for that. The other thing is root cellars. Root cellaring by Mike and Nancy Bubel on what you can do to store for long, like I said, 1 year term as well. Produce any items you're able to. We talked about this in the last lecture. Examples are like beekeeping for honey, maple syrup for maple trees, especially in the New England states. Those are great. Use your own apple and grape juice for sweeteners to be used in canning other types of fruits. Use apple and pear sauce as sweeteners in bread making and baking as well. Honey is very helpful when you're looking at making bread. The other thing is purchase anything that you need but can't grow or produce. So, when you've done everything, you've tried to get as much as and grow your own or purchase and everything else, then there are also other places where you can get it, and that's where bartering or networking becomes available. Here is how to store various foods. Here's a supply, USAemergencysupply.com on how to preserve your food. Also, like I just mentioned, is bartering. Bartering is very, very helpful because, one of the things is if somebody has a piece of equipment that you can't afford, you can't buy right now, then it's great to barter. Maybe your experience on other things can be bartered for somebody's use, especially like medical missionary. Medical missionary, there will be a time when those that have had an interest, that have learned, have been trained, they will be in high demand in these last days. Also, set up or create more storage areas. Build or buy shelving for canned goods. You'll start finding as you start developing an affinity to canning, then you'll start trying to figure out where can I put more storage places for canning. Walk-in pantries. Use extra bedrooms or nooks and crannies. Anywhere where you can store these things. You want to especially look for places like there are cool rooms for fruits, not as cold as a root cellar, but something that will keep them cool, because one thing is the longevity. It will preserve the food longer than in hot environments as well. Attics. This will probably, especially as we're moving into the spring and summer season, this will probably not be the best place. Basements, make sure that your storing is in a dry area, that it's not going to be wet or mildewy or dampy as well. Also, that you're not going to have any type of insects and stuff like that would be bothering. Root cellars, some foods need moisture, others don't. So here's a book called Root Cellaring, Natural Cold Storage in Fruits and Vegetables by Mike and Nancy Bubel. We mentioned them earlier in our last presentation, but that's a good resource book to be able to go through and read it, and you'll learn a lot of tips as well. Minimal prep and equipment. This is in reference to preparing for the meals or the foods to be stored. In an airtight wood cook stove for cooking, canning, baking, dehydrating, etc. are also great if you have a wood stove. If not, we're going to talk about the wood stoves later on. You can look on the top of many wood stoves if you don't have a wood cook stove. you can cook on those, and it's very helpful, especially if you have a wood stove. Then you're not paying a lot for electricity and everything else because you're just getting it from your property is the best thing. The next thing is like a Dutch ovens. Solar ovens are also helpful, but solar ovens are definitely, if you have, like we've been having a lot of cloudy days, you won't get much out of a solar ovens. But more in the southern places where you don't have as much rain, then those become valuable. No bake foods fresh from the garden or root cellar. These are foods that you can just take straight from the garden, clean them up, and then eat them straight. Another book called Cooking with Home Storage by Vicky Tate is another good resource book to be able to have. And then here's one thing, ladies and gentlemen, learn to bake your own bread. Rolls, muffins, make your own pancakes, waffles, mixes from your flour to grind yourself as well. It's very helpful. Grow to purchase wheat and store in a cool, dry place. And here's one from wheatmontana.com. You can purchase their book on how to do that. Also purchase a grain mill, preferably a hand grain mill, to grind your own flour from Country Living Grain Mills. Come to the country. Another resource is Layman's out of Kindred, Ohio. We actually bought one years ago, back in 2008. We drove up there and was fascinated about their store that they had, a lot of off-the-grid products and all that. And one of the things we did purchase was a hand grain mill. You just attach to your table, clamp it on, and then just go to town with getting your own grain and all. Also recommended is cast iron bread pans from Lodge Factory here in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, not too far from our church. Cast iron is very helpful because a lot of times people are deficient in iron, and that's a good way. Plus, cast iron cookware lasts longer, and it just makes food taste much better. Another resource book, Secrets of the Masters Made Easy, on how to do whole wheat bread making by Diana Ballard. Bread making is it's a blessing to learn how to do that. Can save money if once people get used to it. How to make the bread themselves. I like it especially fresh out of the oven. I know it's not the most healthiest, but it's still good with some butter on it as well. The other thing what we need to do is to learn to share. Prepare for others who may also be in need, meaning when we are setting an example, people are going to end up eventually losing everything that they have because they have procrastinated. They have to walk away from everything. So we need to be prepared to also help others that will be in need. Be prepared mentally. Become familiar with Bible stories such like the widow Zarephath that was there and helped Elijah, the prophet of God, in the time of his need. Also memorize Bible texts. Remember, freely ye have received, freely give. And so as God has given us this information, and as we start learning, because moving to the country is a lifestyle change. You have to learn how to accommodate, how to adapt to the different changes, the easy accommodation to get anything, access to Walmart. We're living in a place called Sweetwater, Tennessee, and we were literally 1 mile away from Walmart, and it was pretty bad that every day we were going to Walmart just for our needs because it was right there, convenience and stuff. I'm glad that we were able to move back to the country, and so there's that convenience is not there. Plus, we took things for granted too. The other thing, remember the golden rule, to helping others. Be discreet as well in what you're doing. Don't be sharing. One of the things, if anything, that I've been talking to you about, I'm sharing all these things, but you need to not go around telling and bragging to people how much food you have stored and everything else, because they will remember in the time of need, and true characters really come out. And then, was the old saying, a slip of the tongue has sunk many ships, or something like that. So you got to be very discreet and not tell people, share everything that you know or what you have in your home. Be sure also to get pots and pans large enough for cooking in quantity, because like if you have people that are going to end up leaving the city to the country, then you're going to end up having to learn how to cook for larger groups. We were in Missouri several years ago, and the family that we were living there, they actually had family children of eight. It was 10 of them, so they had to learn how to cook for larger. And then when they did invite us, they were cooking for another 5, so they had 15 people. So learn how to cook for larger as well, but also how to be a steward of what you have. Think of inexpensive ways to put up more food, like gleaning or bartering. Bartering, I keep mentioning. The other thing is realize that God is able to multiply what you have if you're willing to share with others. So, we got to do our part, even if it's small. God will, just like he fed the 5,000 and the 4,000, men and plus women and children. And so God can stretch. And so that's why it's so important to get used to praying. Praying over everything, anytime. Have your PhDs, pray hard daily, and trusting in God, and God will always provide for us what we need. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is gardening and canning tips and tools as well. Here it says food preparation for food storage. Dear friends, just want to send this out again to encourage those that are interested in purchasing bulk foods that Home Depot has their 5-gallon Homer buckets and lids on sale for $2.98 for the 5 gallons and 98 cents for the lids. Now, this is something I wrote years ago, encouraging people on trying to look at doing food storage. And, and so I wrote on, it says, we use the buckets to store large amounts of food. You will need to determine what quantity that you will need to purchase for your family. We will be making a Country Life Foods order in mid-October, and those that would like to order, please let us know. But you better be preparing now, not later. And I wrote, it says, another possible option is getting the 5, 3, and 1 gallon buckets at Walmart. Walmart, in their where they make the cakes and everything else, they use a lot of icing and everything that usually comes in 5 gallons and 3 or 1, and you can go in and ask them, do you have any of these that you'd be willing to, that you're wanting to throw away? Could I have them with? And they come with the seal, with the rubber seals, because they usually clean them up and they're nice and white, prevents the ultraviolet light or anything else to get through it. It says they return them or recycle the buckets. Your best option would be if you have a friend that works in the Walmart and ask them to see if they can either sell them or if they would be willing to give them and all. And so here is how we use them. 1, when purchasing foods like grains, wheat, corn, etc., purchase the 1-gallon freezer Ziploc bags that you can extract all or as much of the air out of the bags as possible. It says the amount of bags you will need will depend on how many buckets you will be purchasing and all. So this is one way. They do have, Ziploc does have a vacuum seal bags that you can have a little machine that can suck the vacuum out. If you do freezing, then you definitely want the freezer bags. But I wouldn't so much encourage to put your whole lot in these freezer, because one day if you can't pay for electricity, then all that food's going to spoil, and you're going to have to be eating a lot of food real quick. Freezing is a means of preserving food through the application and maintenance of extreme cold or below freezing temperatures. It is effective because most of the water of the food tissue is changed from the liquid to the solid state. This change in the physical state of the water retards enzymatic action and stops microbial growth as well from the food spoiling. The causes of food spoilage, thus preserving the food. However, upon defrosting, the spoilage agents can be reactivated. Therefore, defrosted frozen food should be used and not stored or refrozen. So whenever you unfreeze something, you've got to use it. Freezing the original quantity of fresh food is best retained if the food is frozen within 24 hours. The lower the freezing temperature, the more quickly the food will be frozen. Further, the frozen food should be stored at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within minimum fluctuation. Generally, foods are prepared for freezing much as they would be prepared for serving. Select only foods of high quality for freezing. Fruits and vegetables should be of optimum maturity as well if you're going to do that. Drying, again, is another method of preserving perishable foods. So this is another way. That's why we talked about last time about dehydrating. No other method of preservation develops the distinct flavor of the home dry product. An oven that can be maintained at a temperature of 150 degrees for a period of 3 to 6 hours may serve as an adequate source. So if you're not able to buy or build your own dehydrator, then if you have a stove, then that would be the next option. It says the prepared product should be spread out in a large layer on a rack so that there can be maximum circulation of air and quick drying can occur. If fruits are cut thinly, they will not change much in color. No treating is necessary. Start drying process immediately after fruits have been prepared. After drying, the products must be cooled and stored in an airtight container for long use. And so here's another option. I showed you the Ziploc, but this is a better option. There's one that's vacuum sealed. It's a cheap one, about $50 or $60 from Walmart or what have you. It is only for short term, like a couple of days. You're going to open the food back up and use it, but not for long term storage. It doesn't do the best quality sealing. So you're going to end up spending a little bit more money, like $100. These it's called Food Saver. You can buy these at Walmart, Costco's, places like Bed Bath & Beyond. You can spend more money. I think we paid about $200 for ours when they first came out. And so they come with these rolls of either gallon size, and it's actually one roll, and you can just cut it whatever length you want it, seal both ends of it. You can also get them in quart size, again, in rolls. And so, but my suggestion is when you use it, and then when you seal the food, and then you open it up, clean the bag out so you can reuse that bag again for something else, and so you're cutting your cost. You may not be able to store a gallon like you did before, and maybe 3/4 of a gallon or so this next time because you're having to cut some of it to when you open it up. But try to reuse it to get your money's worth, at least maybe two uses of it out of it at the least. The next thing is when purchasing the 5, 25, or 50 pounds of food at a time, like what we talked about from Country Life, then what I do is encourage you to break the bulk into these freezer bags, like we just mentioned here. Place them in a freezer for 72 hours, such as your if you're going to store popcorn, like your wheat, your flours. They usually have bugs in them and all, but if you freeze them for 72 hours, 3 days, and then let them naturally defrost, then what it's going to do is going to kill those bugs so they don't spoil your food as well. It says this will kill bugs, etc., out of the wheat, grains, etc., by breaking down the large bulk. You will only expose 1 gallon of quantity. So when I talk about these buckets, I'm not suggesting you dump all your food in this bucket, because every time you open it up, it exposes that to the airborne pathogens into the bucket, and it will spoil the whole food. You want to put them, again, back into these Ziploc, and they're also freezer bags for longer preservation, and so you're not exposing the whole food. It says your food will also last longer. If starting out, you may want to start with 5 25 buckets or 75 to 100 buckets for a family of 4 or more. This will also be determined on the space you may or may not have to be able, because you want it in a dry, cool, dark place when you're storing your food. You will need to purchase it's a plastic. You can buy a metal lid remover so it doesn't kill your fingers when you're trying to open up the buckets. The other thing is, I would also print, or with masking tape, is write what's in the bucket with a permanent marker, and also date it. And that way you know what's in the bucket, and also would do it on the lid on top of it. So that way if you stack your buckets up, you can read what's in it from the side, and you'll know what food's in there instead of having to open everything up and try to figure out what's in there. And I was also date it. Date it when you put in each of your Ziploc vacuum sealed bags. I would also do the same thing. Write what's in it, the date that you vacuum sealed it, and then it will be better. You'll be better off in the long run. It says you will need to place these 5-gallon buckets in a dry place like a basement. Exposure to sun and moisture will damage your food and will not last as long. Also, these buckets must have a rubber seal to block and seal them from bugs and moisture of the atmosphere as well. Another option is to get the jar sealer that you can get as an attachment with most sealers, and you can vacuum seal your dry foods in canning jars. Most Ace Hardware stores sell the half-gallon jars, and they store twice as much as the quart jars. The sealer come with largemouth and regular mouth sealers, but I have found that the largemouth sealers seal the tightest and are the most secure as well. If you're storing grain, you might want to consider putting diatomaceous earth, as I mentioned earlier. Be sure to get the kind that is made from plants and not from bone. You can eat it. It is safe. It works great as an anti-caking material, but better at killing bugs that might get into the food. Even when you seal up the bucket, it will help and ensure that the bugs will not continue growing or living in there. Food storage, canning. Canning may be defined as the preservation of food in jars or cans by applying heat and forming a hermetic seal. For successful canning of foods, enzyme action must be stopped or controlled, and microorganisms must be destroyed or their growth prevented by canning. So that way they can last longer than most foods that are just left out in the open. Processing consists of heating food for a given time in a can or a jar to prevent spoilage, and is done in a water bath or pressure canner, depending on the type of food. The food is placed in containers, heated and held at a specific temperature for a specific length of time, sufficient to destroy pathogenic microorganism and to prevent fermentation. Time and temperature varies with the food and pack, so it depends on what you're using and also what type of food it is. And this is from the Practical Cookery, page 230. So there's different types of canners. The heat processing of foods in jars requires a container or canner that holds the filled jars or cans with sufficient water to cover them, or that holds steam under pressure. And here's the first one, a steam cooker. Start counting processing time when cooker is well filled with steam. Follow water bath timetables as well. That normally comes with these in instructions when these, like the small pressure cookers. Master Chef 9.5 liter pressure cooker is a great to maybe get started with, and always good to have. The next thing is the steam cooker. It's a water-packed canning for fruits. All fruits and fruit juices can be successfully canned without sugar. Most people think they have to have sugar for this stuff. The sugar is used only to sweeten the food and does not keep it from spoiling. If you prefer to can by the water-packed method, your sweetening can be added at the time of serving. All fruits may be canned without sweetening simply by filling the jar to within 1/2 inch of the top with fruit juice or water, then process. So I would encourage you to use water instead of a sugar or some type of sweetener to add in there as well. It says 2 hours from the garden to the can. All fresh fruits, this is the rule, all fresh fruits and vegetables contain substances called enzymes. They are valuable substances that bring about physiological changes in the food. They are the substances that bring about the ripening and tenderizing of foods under nature's own influence. In other words, they are the developing factors in the foods. But valuable as they are, if they are allowed to go unchecked, they cause decay and danger. So if you can, you want to, within 2 hours from the garden, freshly picked, to the canning, you need to try to get them canned as soon as possible. The other thing is steam cookers. So we've been talking about the steam cooker. By storing foods in cold temperatures, the enzyme activity is somewhat checked, but it is not destroyed. The applied heat of canning destroys the enzyme activity entirely. For that reason, food can be best preserved closest to its natural state if it is canned immediately after being picked or gathered, as we mentioned before. The 2-hour rule is an excellent one. If you can your foods within that period of time, you will be more assured of excellent quality. If that is impossible, your foods should be stored very carefully in a cool, well-ventilated location. So if you get your fruits and vegetables, today, but you can't can to tomorrow, put it at least in a very cool place for storage. The next thing is, another option is pressure canner. The pressure canner is a heavier gauge metal than the water bath. The principal parts of the pressure canner are the container itself, the rack, the lid, the gasket, and the gauge. Everything that you see right there, those are very important to have. In the lid and gasket are so designed that steam cannot escape. Accurate gauges are necessary to measure the pressure of the steam within the container. Prepare and pack product according to directions for hot or cold packing, and when you're using this pressure canner as well. The other thing is place rack in bottom of cooker and add water to bottom of cooker um, about 1 inches or so. Place the filled jars on the rack in the cooler and do not allow jars to touch. Adjust the cover of the cooker and fasten securely by tightening opposite clamps or adjusting the bands. This is basically to sterilize the jars before you use them for canning. It says leave the petcock open until a jet of steam has been spurting from the petcock for 7 to 10 minutes. Then close the petcock and start counting processing time from the minute the required amount of pressure is reached on the pressure gauge. Keep pressure uniform throughout the processing period as well. The next thing is process for required length of time. And again, the manual will give you kind of an idea of what you need to do for pressure cooking. Remove cooker from the fire as soon as the processing time is up and allow the hand on the pressure gauge to return to 0. Then open the petcock gradually. As soon as the processing period is up, remove jars from the canner. Set jars on counter and allow to cool. So that way you are sterilizing these jars and to help preserve the food so they do not spoil. The next thing is the hot water bath. The hot water bath is preferable for processing fruits and tomatoes. They are acid and can be canned safely at boiling temperatures, and the texture and color of the finished product are better. The canner has 3 essential parts: the container or kettle, the rack, and the tight cover as well. This way you can see how this will help with the canning and also making sure that the jars are actually sealed as well. The kettle says should be deep enough to permit 1 to 2 inches of water over the top of jars for brisk boiling. Place the filled jars on the rack in the canner far enough apart to allow the free circulation of water around them. Start counting processing time as soon as water surrounding the jars begins to boil. Keep the water boiling for entire processing period. If water boils down, add sufficient boiling water to keep it at the required height as well. And then it says process the required length of time. It depends, again, what type of food you're putting in there. It will depend on how long the process it will take. As soon as the processing period is up, remove jars from the canner, set jars on a countertop, and allow it to cool. So you'll have to put some towels out there to put these jars because they're obviously going to be wet. There needs some time, and then you'll start hearing the lids start popping. And when you hear them popping, or if you go after several hours of them cooling and they haven't popped, you can actually hit the middle of the lid on the top, and you can either, if it moves, then hasn't been sealed properly. If there's just like a thud, then you know that it has sealed and all the air is out of it. Another method is called the hot and cold pack method. The cold pack method is the process of placing the cold or raw product in the jar and then cooking it. The hot pack necessitates a short pre-cooking time, and then the boiling hot product is placed in clean jars and cooked immediately. The hot pack is usually more successful for vegetables as well. So this is taking just a sterilized jar and all that. It's not, the jar doesn't have to be hot or whatever. Then you put in your fruits or vegetables in there, and then you're adding hot boiling water in there, and then you seal it up, and that's another way of preserving the food. It says, examine and wash jars. Be careful you have no nicks, cracks, or sharp edges. They should be washed well in hot, soapy water and boil for at least 15 minutes in clear water. Carefully select fresh, firm products. Be sure they are at the proper state of ripeness and they're not overripe as well, because otherwise it will spoil the whole jar. Prepare according to recipe. Pack product into the clean jars, not more than a half an inch from the top. An exception to this rule is corn, peas, and lima beans, so they can actually come even higher. For these products, fill the jars to within 1 inch of the top, and then you can add your liquid when you have that in there. Clean tops of jars and seal firmly. Process the required length of time for the method of cooking used. Remove the jars from the cooker or canner. Set the jars on cloth or towels and allow cooling to take place at normal room temperature, and then test for the correct seal. So this way, you're putting the fruits or vegetables in the jars, you put in the hot boiling water in there, then you put in the canner after you've put the lid on there, and then you leave it in there for whatever the cooking time is for whatever the fruit or vegetable is, and then it should start sealing your foods. And so now we're going to look at something else that we need to consider. The other thing is food for fall gardening. This is a fall gardening and fruit culture DVD set on how to prepare a new garden bed, how to take accurate soil tests, and how to interpret the soil test report. And this is from Mountain Media Ministries, the Fruit Culture Collection, Food Growth Guidelines, and the Gardening Collection as well. These are an excellent resource to watch, and you can see there's quite a few DVDs here that you will have to take the time, and I encourage you to take the time to study these out. It also has discover what amendments are in harmony with biological gardening, gain insight into planting a fall garden as well, learn how to plant fruit trees and vines. Even here in Tennessee, you're able to do that. Also, grape culture, pruning fruit trees, and much more is interspersed with many tidbits of practical country living wisdom from this. I believe there's about 12 DVDs in the whole series. Going on. The other one is called Spring Gardening DVD set. The methods demonstrated in fall and spring gardening come from the aspect of growing the most nutritious food possible for health as well as independence from the systems of the world. Spring gardening picks up where fall gardening leaves off. How to prepare your garden in the spring for planting. So if you don't have these, this is a great time to get them. It tells us how to prepare your seeds, care for the plant as they grow, and transplanting and more. Also, it teaches us how to field planting methods for those who want to implement a large-scale crop. So this is for larger gardening. And step-by-step construction of a compost bin, which will help provide nutritious food for your garden as well. This is very important to have a compost. My mother and I used to have, it was about probably a 6 feet, it was a chicken fencing that we just made into a circle and bind the tips of the metals together. And we would do a compost where all the food, newspaper, mushrooms, whatever, we would heap in a pile. And then we had another wired compost, chicken wire, that when every 6 months we would flip the compost, and the compost on the bottom from all the worms that had been eating all that, the scrap, it was very nutritious composting that we would put in the garden, and you could see the garden very much grow more effectively and efficiently as well. The next thing is planting by the blueprint. Master gardener Lynn Hogg demonstrates step-by-step a tried and true method that has yielded bountiful results. The LNG White method is given to her during the night season, and this is where we get the planting by the blueprint as well, is what God has instructed how we are to grow, because then by God's method, then God will bless us even more abundantly as well. This divine method will grow trees, especially fruit trees, and any deep-rooted plants or vines faster, many times larger, and will not only help fruit trees yield more fruit, but it will help them yield sooner. Use this method for like tomato plants. Lynn demonstrates step-by-step how to implement this amazing method of planting trees, especially fruit trees. So it is very valuable for us to have in these last days. And so one of the things is, the image to the beast is the test for God's people. We've got to prepare, and we've got to do, and this time now, we don't have much time to make these necessary preparations. We've got to pray earnestly, and God will open or close the door. If you feel that this in the country, in the mountains, is where God wants you to, put fleeces out, test God. Because here in Selected Messages, it says, the Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast will be formed. Now, there's a difference between the image, and you can see the image of the beast. The image of the beast is, as we've been going through on Sabbath, the last Earth's final empire is based on Revelation 13, on the first beast and the second beast. The second beast makes an image of the beast, means it has the same characteristics. Does the same thing. So she says that the image of the beast will be formed before probation closes. We can see that the image of the beast is being formulated right now. For she says it is to be the great test. And then the commentators says, see the previous chapter where the great test for the people of God is shown to be Sunday law enforcement. See, the Sunday law enforcement is the test for us. It says, for the people of God by which their eternal destiny will be decided. So the image of the beast. The image to the beast is something different. It is what we say the mark of the beast. It is Sunday legislation. Look at this other quote here. What is the image to the beast, and how is it to be formed? The image is made by the two-horned beast and is an image to the beast. So see, the two-horned beast of Revelation 13, starting verse 11, is making an image to the beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10. So the two-horned beast of Revelation 13, 11, and 17 makes an image to the beast portrayed in Revelation 13, 1 through 10. Then to learn what the image is like and how it is to be formed, we must study the characteristics of the beast itself. Who? The papacy. It says, when the early church became corrupted by departing from the simplicity of the gospel and accepting heathen rites and customs, she lost the spirit and power of God. And in order to control the consciences of the people, she sought the support of the secular power. The result was the papacy, a church that controlled the power of the state and employed it to further her own ends, especially for the punishment of who? Heresy. In order for the United States to form an image of the beast, the religious power must so control the civil government. That's why back in 1787 there was a separation of church and state, but now it is the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will be so employed by the church to accomplish her own ends. The church will force the government to do what it wants. The image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism which will be developed when the Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. We are seeing that. We're seeing the foundations being laid now, that the Protestant churches will go to the government, United States government, and they will push, encourage, compel, they will even threaten them. If you do not do what we say, we will not reelect you back into office. And we're seeing that right now. God calls, listen closely to the next couple of quotes. God calls for men and means, those who cannot see the signs of the times in this wicked and adulterous generation, listen, will be found with those who perish under the plagues poured from the vials of God's wrath. If you do not see the times, signs in the times we're living in, and we're not moving out of the country, moving out of the cities into the country, if we're not giving up the Babylonian diet, the Egyptian medicines and stuff like that, if we're not overcoming sin, having victory over sin and all that, then we will be found with the plagues of the rest of the world. My brothers and sisters, we've got to cut loose from everything. Here's another quote. The plagues of the last days are to be poured out on the inhabitants of the world who have shown marked contempt for the law of God. God's people should seek to reach the people of the world, proclaiming the truth as it is found in His Word. But the time will come when they will have to move away from the cities. I believe the time has come, brothers and sisters. Possibly we're past that time. And live in small companies by themselves. If our people regard God's instructions as of value, they will move away from the city so that they will not be pained by its revolting sights, and that their children will not be corrupted by its vices. Those who choose, listen closely, those who choose to remain in the cities, if you do not heed the warning of God to come out of the cities, she says, those who choose to remain in the cities, surrounded by the houses of unbelievers, she says, must share the disaster that will come upon them. You will share the disaster. So I'm pleading with you, move out of the cities as fast as possible. Will the churches heed the Laodicean message? Will they repent, or will they, notwithstanding that the most solemn message of truth, The third angel's message is being proclaimed to the world. Go on in sin. This is the last message of mercy, the last warning to a fallen world. If the church of God becomes lukewarm, which it has, it does not stand in favor with God any more than do the churches that are represented as having fallen and become the habitation of devils and the hold of every vile spirit in the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So see, if we become Laodicea, lukewarm, we're not in any better favor than the rest of the other churches and all that. Wow, what a solemn warning to us. Those who have had opportunities to hear and receive the truth and who have united with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, calling themselves the commandment-keeping people of God, and yet possess no more vitality and consecration to God than do the nominal churches, look, listen, will receive the plagues of God just as verily as the churches who oppose the law of God. Only those that are sanctified through what? The truth will compose the royal family in the heavenly mansions Christ has gone to prepare for those that love him and keep his commandments. See, only those that are sanctified, we will be protected from the plagues that happen upon the earth. That's why it's so important for us to share this information with those people that we come in contact with. That's why it's important, the things that I've been sharing with you, that this is just to give you a help and a guidance. Now we're going to look at something more. Heating with wood safely, brothers and sisters. How do you do that? Well, we have to learn how to get the wood and how to cut it and get it ready for it to be able to be cook with, to heat with as well. The key to seasoning lies in the wood itself. Most firewood properly split and stacked takes at least a season to dry properly. For many of us, that is about 6 months. If you stack your wood in early spring, it should be ready to be put away for winter use by October. So if you cut it and you stack it, it will give it enough time to dry out. And so you can see here that if you knock the two pieces together and you hear a ring, then a thud, then it's probably dry. So if you hear a ring, then a thud. Also, burn a piece on a roaring fire base. See if it will burn within 15 minutes is another way to test if the wood is dry. And look for cracks. If you see cracks at the end of the log that you've cut, then you know that it is dry, because dry wood will start cracking. If you are burning green, and this is very important, many people think, well, we can just wait till the winter and we'll cut wood. If you're burning green or wet wood, up to 40% of your BTU, or basically the fire to try to burn the wood, is used to try to dry the wood that you're trying to burn. So that's a lot of energy to try to dry your wood while it's burning, and therefore that's why you're not getting the heat, a nice, wonderful, comfortable heat in the winter. How to tell if wood is dry? There are cracks in the end grain. The wood darkens with aging as well, you can tell. The freshly split face feels warm and dry. Dry wood sounds hollow, yet while wet wood sounds dull when you hit them together. Burn some. If it hisses, it is much too wet. The hissing sound is the water escaping and basically boiling at the end. That's the hissing sound. So this is what you would see as dry firewood. Make sure that the ends, that you start seeing all these cracks and stuff, because the wood is drying. And so this is a good way, an idea, suggestion. If, again, it's going to cost you some time, some money, a little bit for some supplies. Maybe not so much the logs, if you can get them off your own property. You may need some 2x4s and some roofing, but that way it will, during the spring and summer, allows the wood, and every person is going to take, it's going to use a different amount of wood. When we were dependent more on wood than what we are now, to heat our cabin, to heat the lifestyle center, and to heat the guest house, we would have to cut about 15 trees every year. And what my philosophy was, I'd rather get the wood that was already fallen down on the ground, clean that area up, because one, if there's ever a fire and you're cleaning up all that underbrush, you have less likely that your house will burn because of the underbrush. You're not giving the fire fuel that wood needs to be used. And I would cut it and then split it, and then we would stack it and let it dry. This is another way that they use not only for storing wood, but also for um, insulating their homes. Now, a lot of probably there are some Americans that probably do this, but this is more in places like Denmark and Norway and all that they use the wood for not only insulation, but also for storing right outside. Now, if you do this and you want to make sure that you have your house is very well insulated, probably more brick it so that way bugs can't get in through your house, and then you have an indoor problem as well, especially like termites and all that. Another way to heat with wood is, if you're not going to use your greenhouse during the winter, then use it for storage. So that way your greenhouse is being used constantly as well to store the wood. That's also a good way of drying your wood because it gets pretty hot during the winter. Good quality wood stoves is, I want to share with this, is Judo wood stove, various cast iron models. Lupi wood stoves is a cast iron and various plate steel models as well is another one. Vermont casting wood stoves is another resource as well. This is all depending on where you are at. Different types of wood stoves out there. Cast iron versus plate steel wood. Cast iron has always been the preferred material of the skilled stove maker because it is extremely hard wearing and durable. It will last much longer. Because of this, cast iron stoves generally last longer than plate steel stoves. Cast iron stoves store and distribute heat more evenly and for a considerably longer period than any other materials used in stove manufacture. Even though cast iron is the preferred material for wood stoves, there are many good quality plate steel and soapstone wood stove manufacturers such as Blake's King, Lupi, Silent Flame, Hearthstone, etc. But be sure and research before you purchase because there are many so desirable wood stove manufacturers on the market. So don't, make sure that whatever you purchase, you're going to be happy with, that you understand how to use it and what's the longevity, warranties as well. Some of them have warranties on them. Also, good wood stove, Flameview, Baker's Choice, Kitchen Queen, and P.R.E.P.A.R.E.D. I'm going to show you some that we actually resell for some Amish. There's only one Amish community in the United States outside of Canada that actually makes these. And so one fire cooks, bakes, preserves food, dehydrates your food, heats your home, and heats your hot water if you add the hot water part of it. And that's why, watch our DVDs getting started with wood cook stove at Eads Pathway. I think it's still up. I'll have to check that. The other thing is wood cooking and heating. This is by the Amish, the Pioneer Princess. This is kind of like their top of the line now. Baker's Choice is a little simpler. The other one is the P.R.E.P.A.R.E.D. And then the Cunningham. These are all cast iron wood cook stove. But this one, again, is just for heating. You can do some cooking up on top. You're looking at probably around, this one fully loaded, around $3,000. This is actually less expensive than some of these other ones that are fancy, that's got all this chrome and all that. And what's nice about this one is you can have a side loader to load the wood up here. This is your oven here. Whereas this one is a top wood loader, and you have to have smaller pieces to try to get in that. So there are some advantages and disadvantages as well. These also, you can add a hot water system where you can have a radiator or radial heat where the water runs through like a radiator in here back to your tank. So that way you have hot water, but your hot water is only going to be hot when you're running your wood cook stove as well. So now let's look at some wood cutting equipment. It's very important to own a reliable, and I can't stress this, and dependable chainsaw, especially during the time where we cannot buy and sell. There are two reliable and durable chainsaws. Now, I know we were not going to be able to do buy and sell for the gas and the oil and replacing the chains, but for right now, while we can, we need to get the right type of equipment. The steel is the one I prefer. It's a German made. I actually had two of them, one a 16-inch and an 18-inch. The Farm Boss, the 290, it's a workhorse, and I loved it and all that. But if other people want, there is another option. There's another one's a good quality, it's not as best as what I think is the steel is the Husqvarna. These are Sweden made. All professionals use one of these two that I've presented. Both products manufacture three grade levels: the homeowner or occasional use, okay, the mid-range for the professional grade, or the professional grade level as well. People that are actually out there cutting trees for a living and all. Like I said, the Farm Boss is my favorite because they're a workhorse. They never tear up unless you just happen to drop them from quite a bit of distance, and then obviously they are going to break. So the most popular saw that can cut all the firewood you will need is the Steel Farm Boss, the 290. That's kind of in the middle range of pricing. It comes with an 18 or 20-inch bar and is recommended to cut large trees and reach farther when delimbing and bucking trees. This mid-range type of saw costs anywhere from $350 to $500, depending on where you're going to get it from as well. Also, you need to be careful. You need to have chainsaw safety. One well-known rule is never cut wood when tired. Accidents usually happen when operator is tired. Also, 90% of chainsaw injuries happen somewhere between the toes and waist. Always wear protective and quality chainsaw caps, boots with steel toes as well to prevent any damage as well. So that's why this gentleman has these coverings over his pants, so that if the chain happens to buck or whatever, it's not going to cut into his legs as well. The other thing, supplies you'll need is gasoline. Gas can be preserved for up to 10 years by using that P.R.E.P.A.R.E.D that I mentioned earlier, the gas preserver. You're going to need oil for mixing with gas as well. You can normally, if you have a steel, I don't usually use the steel brand because you're going to spend twice as much. But I use the oil you can get chainsaw oil from Walmart. You can also get the oil additive for the gas, also from Walmart or from Lowe's. You'll need bar oil as well, the same places I would get for winter grade or even summer grade. Extra cutting chains. You depends on how much you're going to cut. You may go through one or two chains per season, and that's not uncommon as well. Extra files for sharpening. You can get hand files. You can have electric files, whatever. You want to keep those sharpened because the better or I guess I should say, the more often you sharpen your chainsaw, the more efficient your chainsaw is going to be. It's not going to use as much gas. It's not going to wear you out as well. You want a file guide for to use in sharpening your chains. Your spark plugs, you're going to change as well, probably once or twice a year. And then you want a repair manual, if it's available, on how to fix your own chainsaw. Now, one thing that I would suggest is great to have the chainsaw. Let's use what we can, but we need to be purchasing a cross-cut saw that it will be necessary because one day, no buy, no sell, we may have to hand cut. And so a two-man a cross-cut saw is very helpful because it's less wear and tear. But I would also encourage learning how to use that so that way you're not like, well, how am I going to do this? Plus you get accommodated. So a cross-cut saw will be necessary currently as a backup when your chainsaw breaks down, but most importantly when you are unable to buy parts or get it repaired, or when you're out of gas and oil and can't buy it as well. The last company that manufactures crosscut saws in the U.S. is the Crosscut Saw Company, crosscutsaw.com. I recommend ordering the Crosscut Saw Manual. It's about $4. This rare publication is one of the few that will show you how to sharpen crosscut saws, because that is a trade that is actually becoming very rare. It says you can also purchase the necessary tools needed to sharpen the crosscut saw. Another thing where you can find them, some of these are at flea markets. Flea markets are a great resource to purchase inexpensive quality saws. For instance, the National Forest Service has produced a great DVD called The Crosscut Sawyer. This is for their employees, how to properly and safely use a crosscut saw. It may be viewed on YouTube at this link as well. You can write the link. I do encourage people that have never either used a chainsaw or a crosscut saw or a handsaw, it is very important to learn how to use it. It says if you want to purchase a new German crosscut saw, go to this traditionalwoodwonder.com. Here's another good two-man saw, traditional woodworker. This two-man crosscut saw, it's called a 56 Germany perforated lance. It's a 56 teeth. Now, on top of the chainsaw, crosscut saw, something else you may want is a log splitter. There is a 10-ton hydraulic log splitter where you can use manually. We used to have to use that when we first moved out in the country. I tell you what, you really get your work out trying to split it with this hand held or hand hydraulic and everything else. But as you able to, then the next thing that I would suggest, and there's many types out there, I just worked to get this 27-ton Troy-built log splitter from Lowe's. At the time, it was $1,499. It's a little bit less now, but this has worked for us probably since 2011. So for the last 9 years, 10 years or so, we've been using. Before then, we were borrowing our friends, and we would travel about an hour to go get it and bring it back for a week or two, and all until I was able to save them funds for this. Something else you will need as well is called it's a wood splitting maul, used in splitting smaller diameter rounds, which is called a section of a log that has been cut to the length of that will fit into a particular wood stove. And so you'll need this wood splitting maul. Also steel wedges. Sometimes when you're trying to split a log, it won't split, so the splitting wedge will allow you to get further into the log to split it as well. Also, you will probably need a sledgehammer for driving the wedges into a larger diameter rounds as well. And so it's always good to have that on hand. The other thing is a log lifter. If you cut a tree down, cut all its branches and everything else, and then you're trying to haul larger trees, or you're at least trying to cut it in maybe 16 to 18 inches, depends on how big your stove is or your fireplace is, you'll need this log lifter to be able to lift it off the ground, because if you're trying to use a chainsaw to cut the log while it's on the ground, if the chainsaw hits the ground, it will start dulling the chain. And so this log lifter will get it up off the ground so you don't in danger of dulling your chain the blades as well. Another thing is axes, kindling axe, or mini maul. Kindling axes and mini mauls are used to split rounds into kindling. And you want make little kindlings to be able to have something to be able to start your fire with, and so into thin pieces and all that. So this is what, again, I would suggest you looking into. And so I appreciate, again, your time that you spent with us on part 3 of our country living, and I encourage you to go forward. Go forward by faith, trusting and believing that God's going to sustain you, that He's going to lead you into where you need to be. But again, my stress to you, as you've been hearing me, is don't delay, get out in the country. And not only that, please pick up the phone, tell other people, your family, your friends, anyone you can come in contact with, to get out of the cities. Get out of these cities before it's too late. So as we close, I want to just close with prayer and thank you again for being here with us, watching us online, or those that will be watching later. I encourage you, please contact us. You can email us at stepstochristministry@gmail.com. Also, I encourage you to share these videos and other Present Truth videos that we've been sharing on YouTube and on Facebook. I'm more than happy to try to help anyone that we can, because the time is now that we must follow God's instruction, because as we're told in Amos 3:7, surely the Lord God does nothing unless He reveals His secrets to His servants, the prophets. So shall we pray. Father in heaven, as we come to Thee in closing, thank You again for this time that we have. I pray that those that were here with us, that were watching online, Lord, that they were inspired with hope and courage, that they were not overwhelmed with all this information, but I pray that they have been steadily taking notes, that they will be watching, reviewing, and seeing, and just taking the advice that we were able to share with them, and that they will be able to prioritize, go step by step, that You will direct them to where they need to live, that you will also direct them what property that they need to purchase, what price, how much, what if it comes with a house or without, or what size they need to build. All these things, Lord, I know that they need help and guidance, and I know that you are there to help them. I know you've already set people before them, the property and everything that they need to go to. Lord, I know that you are going to be with us at every step. And so I trust and believe, and I claim the promises that you will not leave us nor forsake us, that you will give us the right path, that you will prepare the way before us as well. In Jesus' name, amen.